This new lawsuit is basically alleging that Donald Trump ignored outside experts and advice, that he inflated his personal value, and he roped his family and friends into supporting the fraud. And, say what you will, Donald Trump ran his business the way he ran the country. And you're absolutely right. It's pattern after pattern.
The New York AG says there were more than 200 instances of fraud committed over the last 10 years. And that pattern after pattern of the behavior within the Trump organization, it actually may have been going on for decades. Let's bring in Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter David Cay Johnston. He wrote The Big Cheat: How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. David, for years, you have been shouting much of what Tish James talked about today from rooftops. So knowing what you know about Trump's business history, put today's news in context.
Well, what's significant today is that finally we have a law enforcement official who has civil authority, not criminal, laying out Donald Trump's constant cheating. It's just who he is. And doing so in a way that, and this is really an important aspect of this, will show that he does this personally. Donald often will say, well, I just did what the lawyer said, or what the accountants told me to do, or what the experts said. In one case, an appraisal of one of his buildings was at $200 million. He then put in his net worth statement that it was over $500 million and said that's what the appraisers said. That kind of fraud is going to be very, very difficult for Donald when this comes to trial. And clearly, there are going to be documents galore and witnesses. And they've done a very thorough job, and they put together a very solid case.
Let's talk about how this could hurt him. And I want to draw a comparison because already Trump and his family are not allowed to sit on a charity board for 10 years in New York. That's embarrassing. But where the real punishment was, they were forced to shut down their foundation. They actually had to give the money to charities that they promised to, and they had to pay a fine. That's the price. Now, what Tish James is looking for here, Donald Trump and his adult children could not be officers in any sort of business in New York, which that's not really that bad. Who cares? But the real painful thing would be that no New York bank, no U.S. bank could lend to them again. Talk to us about how damning that is. Because if you've got no liquidity, you got nothing.
No, that's exactly right. If you don't have liquidity, you have nothing. And Donald always has these cash flow problems. You know, he claims to be a multi-billionaire, but he doesn't have the cash flow to pay his bills. I'm a newspaper reporter who raised 8 children. I always paid my bills on time. So Donald would be able to operate businesses in New York, but only if he owned them directly. He wouldn't have the shield of a corporation to insulate him. He'd have to own them directly. And he basically is being shut out of business in New York if the attorney general gets a court to rule in her favor in this civil suit. And one of the problems Donald is going to have here is that he took the Fifth Amendment when questioned by the attorney general's staff more than 400 times, Eric Trump something on the order of 500 times. Now, in a criminal matter, you have an absolute right to do that. You can't question it. But in a civil matter, a judge may, doesn't have to, but may draw an adverse inference. The reason you wouldn't answer the questions is that they were damning to your case. And that's going to be also a very major problem for him. But not being able to do business with banks that do any business in New York, well, that would reduce him to some small bank in the middle of Iowa.
But could Trump just get cute here? Put the business under his other children's names, move it to the state of Florida? Can he do anything like that?
Any move to do that, you're going to see Letitia James in court instantly hollering fraudulent transfer. And so, no, he can't do that. And his children, you know, he is a man who has exposed his children. I mean, whatever you might think of Michael Flynn, the general that Obama warned Trump not to hire, when federal charges came out and there was a choice between Flynn and his son, Flynn stood up for his son. I don't expect to see Donald Trump stand up for his own children if push comes to shove.
Let's talk about those children, because Bill Barr talked about that earlier today, and I want you to watch this.
I'm not even sure she has a good case against Trump himself, but what ultimately persuades me that this is a political hit job is she grossly overreaches when she tries to drag the children into this. Yes, they had roles in the business, but this was his personal financial statement.
Children? We ain't talking about Barron, who's 16. We're talking about 44, 40, and 38. For years, Ivanka was a key executive in the company. She's the one who negotiated the Trump Hotel in Washington. Don Jr. and Eric, they ran the company when Trump was in office. What the hell is Bill Barr talking about?
Well, Barr is really trying to get at Letitia James, who ran for office saying, essentially, I'm going to get Donald Trump. Civilly, I'm going to get him. That's really an imprudent thing to do. And you can bet that as we move toward a trial, the Trump side will scream that this is unfair. But I don't think it'll get them in particular anywhere. But Donald has in the past, suggested that his son, Don Jr., who's in his 40s, well, he's just a boy, basically. Nonsense. I mean, we're not even talking about someone who's what I call to my children a probationary adult from 18 to 30. They're way past that. And they're so deeply involved in the matters that are going on here. If you or I were to lie to banks the way that Donald Trump did, and the government became aware of it, we would be in deep trouble. Okay, and one of the questions, Richard,
Hold on a second, though. Let's say he did lie to the banks. He's saying it's the bank's fault. And it's rare that I say, does Donald Trump have a point? But just stay with me. Almost no bank in New York would do business with him because they knew he was a liar. But Deutsche Bank did. In fact, when he tried to do business with Deutsche Bank on the institutional side, I know this, I worked there, and he showed up and said, this is what the value of my brand is, they laughed him out of the building. But instead of walking out of the building, he just walked back in the side door and went to the private bank. And the private bank said, come on in. And they did business with him. So is there some accountability for those who did business with him when everybody else on the street knew he was a big fat liar?
Well, that's the point I wanted to get to. The banks are not innocent here. The insurance companies are not innocent here. There is a great deal of lawlessness going on among our big banks, especially international banks. We have a long history of banks like Citibank helping the then president of Mexico loot the public treasury and hide money. There's just enormous amount of litigation that's gone on about money laundering, helping criminals move money. And we need to really rethink, first of all, the standards of white-collar crime in America, which we do very little to enforce. You go rob a bodega with a water pistol and we'll put you in prison. But you rob a bank and do it the way Donald Trump does it, and nothing happens to you. Now, Trump is going to argue all of these loans were repaid. It doesn't matter. If you reach into the company, the bank's vaults and take money, and you put it back later because you won the horse you put it on won at the racetrack, you've still committed a crime. So Donald has real serious problems here, but we do need to look at the failure of our system to enforce the law against big banks and insurance companies. And this is a significant factor in something I've been writing about for 25 years, which is our worsening inequality, because it's really a form of subsidy for the super rich, and it's paid for by the rest of us through less access to credit and less beneficial credit terms.
Well, whenever you want to come back and talk about that, we've always got time for it. David Cay Johnston, thank you for joining us tonight.